So I'd like to introduce the moderator for this panel, Dr. John Dixon. John Dixon is the Principal Research Coordinator for South and West Africa, Asia and Africa at ACIAR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, and a Research Program Manager for a number of the projects that are coming through the centre. So I'll hand over to you, John.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. That's great to be opening up the panel sessions. We all know that food security is the issue of our times, but it's not only today, and this is likely to last for the decades to come. We know that Africa's at a tipping point, that economies are taking off, but agricultural sectors are stagnating. So as we look at food security, we're fully aware that sustainable and productive farming systems is one of the key pillars that will take us forward in Africa and across the world. So I have now the great honour and pleasure to introduce 4 distinguished science leaders who are members of Panel 1. All are leaders of science in their own fields. They're widely published and they're recognised both in Africa and Australia and elsewhere around the world. Very, very briefly, in order to save time, I would like to introduce all 4 to you now and then ask them to come up one by one to the podium. First of all, Professor Agnes Mwang'ombe, Professor of Pathology and also Principal of the College of Agriculture and Veterinary Sciences, University of Nairobi, and also a member of the CGIAR board. Will be the first member of the panel to speak in a moment. She has also been in the past Dean of the college in the University of Nairobi. She also has been awarded the Elder of the Burning Spear by the President of Kenya some years ago for her contributions to research. That the second speaker will be Dr. Jimmy Smith, who is Director General of the International Livestock Research Institute. Dr. Jimmy Smith is an animal scientist, brought up in Guyana in the Caribbean, and then has moved on to a variety of senior positions in the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, Canadian CIDA, and the World Bank, and now leading through to Director Generalship at the International Livestock Research Institute. The third speaker is Dr. Brian Keating, Director of the Sustainable Agricultural Flagship in CSIRO Australia. Brian has something like 30 plus years of experience around the world in smallholder farming systems development, has worked a lot with intensification, climate change. He's also had the pleasure to be one of the scientists on one of the very first ACIAR projects in Africa in 1984 in Kenya. The final speaker will be Mulugetta Mekuria, Senior Scientist, CIMMYT, and also the Program Coordinator for the SIMLESA program. And Mulugetta is an Ethiopian who has worked extensively with farming systems. He has been Professor and Head of the Department of Agricultural Economics, Faculty of Agriculture, University of the North, which is now University of Limpopo in South Africa. So we have a very experienced set of panel members. We would like to now hear from them the key issues as they see it in relation to sustainable and productive farming systems going forward in Africa, and to focus on what could be research gaps or on novel partnerships that the Centre could conceivably invest in through the partnerships between Australia and Africa. So, over to Professor Agnes Mwang'ombe.
Good afternoon, everybody. My brief interaction will focus on some highlights on current status, Some highlights also on policy frameworks, role of global research programs, a few proposed areas where Australian International Food Security Center could focus on. As already mentioned, on the issue of food and nutrition security and poverty in Africa, I'd like just to highlight one key statement. Food and nutrition insecurity is closely interlinked with poverty. And as we talk of development, until those affected by this, until we deal with the issue of food and nutrition security, the issue of their own development is highly compromised. African countries are, as already highlighted, are very committed to Millennium Development Goals, as well as through the CADEP process, they have purposed to grow their agricultural sector by at least 6%. However, there was a component at the time when these frameworks were put in place, the issue of climate change was not clearly in the focus or not well articulated. And yet we know the impacts of either floods or droughts are very catastrophic to the communities to the people we are looking at. The CADEP pillar has already been articulated, but I'd like to highlight CADEP pillar 4 for a reason which I'm linking up to the next discussion. There is an initiative which we are calling Dublin Initiative, which is discussing the alignment of CGIA work as well as the CADEP. The CGIA focuses on these 4 SLOs: reduce rural poverty, improve food security, improve nutrition and health, and also sustainable manage rural resources. Now, this will be achieved again through partnerships. That has been a very clear focus, and those of you who attended the GCAD 2, this came up as a great issue as far as CGIA is concerned. CGIA has already rolled out 15 programs, and some of them are clearly anchored in African continent. And one of the things we are trying to interrogate is how the CRPs, through their partnerships, whether at regional level, sub-regional level, or national, how are they interacting so that we can be able to deal with what we see as a problem of food and nutrition security in sub-Saharan Africa. Some of the things which I have proposed and can further be discussed is looking at creation of effective seed systems. And here I'm including vegetatively propagated materials. For instance, the famous orange flesh sweet potato, the cassava. How can this be further facilitated to reach out to the farming communities? Because under normal circumstances, the private sector does focus a lot on the other seed systems like the maize, the grain, but we find these technologies are not clearly, the uptake path is not clearly worked out. We also have to look at other indigenous crops. For instance, the work done by Biodiversity as far as indigenous vegetables are concerned. We know they are very nutritious, they are highly marketable, yet the seed systems is not clearly worked out, so the farmers don't end up getting the upper benefit. Large support for human and institutional capacity building. Here I'm looking at the youth. We keep talking of the young shying away from agriculture science. How can we engage with the young and those who are already committed into the degree programs, how can we retain them in the system without losing them? And in the other side, I also look at human capacity for the farmers, so that these farmers are given capacity and they can be able also to create a demand for the technologies which we are rolling out. The other one, supporting processing and value addition initiative to reduce the wastage of the harvested farm produce. If we look at the perishable crops like cassava tubers, potato, all these cannot be stored in the normal storage processes we know. How can we deal with that? The other one is the production of vegetables in the high potential areas where the infrastructure is so poor, you can hardly get them in the markets where they are highly needed. So that is another component which I'm also proposing. The other one, creation and, or rather creating and having very effective partnerships. And here I'm looking at the global level, regional level, national level, and even at grassroots level. I think with those few remarks, I beg to sit. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me thank the family of development agencies here in Australia for inviting me, and indeed my other colleagues from the Becca ILRI Hub here to this very important meeting. Each time John leaned over to me, he cut a few minutes off my time, and notwithstanding my anxiety about the time, I must digress a little bit to say a particular thank you to the Government of Australia for supporting the CGIAR. On behalf of the CGIAR family, represented here and not here, we want to say a very special thank you for your support in both financial and intellectual terms. Many great Australians, Sir John, Derek Tribe, John Dolan, John Vorko, and another John at the podium here have been contributing. I was asked to speak on the livestock sector, and so having been cut to about 6 minutes, let me go through this very quickly and only, in some sense, give you some points to ponder. The first is, as you've heard many times already, is that per capita consumption for livestock products are rising very steeply in relation to population growth, urbanization, and income. So over the next several decades, per capita consumption will rise steeply, and therefore aggregate consumption will rise very steeply for livestock products across the world, and including in Africa. Sorry for this small writing here, but what you cannot see is, other writing, is that 7 of the 9 important, in value terms, commodities in agriculture, 7 of the 9 are livestock commodities. That's an important point to ponder. 8.5 billion domestic animals, 70% of the globe are in developing countries, 1.4 trillion worth, and the livelihood of over 1 billion people, many of whom are in Africa and mostly women. And most importantly, livestock contribute very significantly to food and nutritional security, but more importantly, it should be remembered that one can be fed but not nourished, and animal source foods are a big source of nourishment. And of course, to agriculture broadly, as you can see there. Wherever you look, there is going to be growth for every livestock sector in every part of the world, and Africa is no exception. So with that great opportunity, how do we connect the 300 or so smallholder producers in Africa to this opportunity to produce and market their products, escape their poverty, contribute to food and nutritional security? This is a tremendous opportunity for us, and to which the Australian International Food Security Centre can contribute. So, as we have already heard, many of these livestock are in crop livestock systems. As you can see, if you take off the morph part of this graph, The rest is what is produced in developing countries, and the blue and the green show the mixed systems. Most of the meat are produced in these smallholder mixed systems, and here is where we need to intervene. What must we do? We must reduce the productivity gap currently existing in these systems. About 130% for beef and 330% for milk. There's a huge productivity gap, even with current breeds. We have not yet started to improve our breeds, and we have this sort of productivity gap. So we must cut this. We must reduce the feed gap. With existing breeds in these environments, the feed gap is somewhere about 50 to 70%. And we must address, of course, the very important issues of morbidity and mortality rates, and of course the vulnerability that we've been hearing about so many times this morning. To do all of this, we must importantly develop novel partners. And it's not the partners that are novel, but the novel partnerships that we need to develop. And as I didn't say, but should have said, that 90% of the livestock products which are produced are consumed in the countries in which they are produced. And these are produced and sold mostly in informal markets. So we need novel partnerships to bridge this gap, provide the access of smallholders to markets. So engagement with traders and these types of partners that we have not engaged with in the past, we need to do so now. So 3 quick messages. Livestock sector growth, livestock sector is growing very rapidly. It's a demand-led growth, and it's an opportunity to connect smallholders and deliver them to markets, particularly women. If we connect them to markets, we will help them escape their poverty. And the R&D partnerships which we are needed, most importantly, must attack the yield gaps. I'm sorry I didn't have more time to expatiate on these, but here are a few quick things that I would say the research agenda could address. On the biophysical side is increasing the productivity, breeds, feed, and health, protecting livestock assets, vaccines, and insurance, livestock and the environment in both directions, livestock on the environment on livestock, a whole range of institutional issues which we can tackle, and of course, this important work on understanding farming systems better that we have already been alluding to. Thank you, John.
Over to Brian.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. Okay, Sub-Saharan Africa has got the potential to not only feed itself, but to export food and other agricultural products to a world in which food security is a growing challenge. What we're talking about here in the next 40 years is an absolute need to at least double agricultural output, and a potential perhaps to triple agricultural output in 40 years. That is possible. It's been done before in other parts of the world. You've heard today already where some of the possibilities lie. This photo is a farm that I've been watching for 30 years. John mentioned that I used to work in Kenya on an ACIAR project. This farm I visited a few months ago. It's a lot greener now than it was 30 years ago. Tangible evidence that inputs are starting to happen. And there is a positive mood around in this part of Kenya now, productivity starting to rise. But there have been complex and long-standing barriers to lifting that productivity, and they do extend well beyond a set of adapted agricultural technologies or practices, and we've heard about this already today. They include the markets, the institutions, the food value chains, nutrition and health issues that have been on the agenda already today, and wider issues of economic development. And this is a session on farming systems approaches, and this is a statement that, a systems approach is self-evident, I guess, but it's critical. And we've got to find new ways of stimulating innovation in both the public and private sectors. people have been talking about farming systems approaches in agriculture for 30 or 40 years. In that time when I was in Kenya, we focused down the bottom end of that triangle, the subsistence farmer end, and it was about, how are these subsistence farms working? What are the technical opportunities to lift productivity? We knew about some of those 25 years ago. Since that time, recognition has been that the opportunities have to address some of these market-led challenges. We've got to connect that smallholder subsistence farming base through to markets in whatever way is possible, and that's where I think a lot of the focus of our efforts need to go. And it's pleasing that the Food Security Centre has chosen this focus to get beyond just the technology focus, but to find out how to better bridge the divide through to practice. And clearly input and output markets and so on are going to be central to that. But we can't ignore the fact that many of these systems in Africa, but also in our experience in Australia, have also got to deal with land degradation, and that productivity gain has to be achieved without adding a big new load of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And it's going to have to be achieved, as we heard earlier, in the presence of significant levels of climate change. And if you want to look at Australia from a slightly different perspective, one thing you notice in this map is that how big a place Africa is. These continents here are to scale, and they are located at the appropriate latitudes. One version of Australia flipped into the northern hemisphere, but you do start to see why we often talk about some of the common environments, climates, soils, pests and diseases, farming systems. So Australia, there are geographical reasons why Australia and Africa have many things in common. And just taking, say, Northern Australia here and looking where in the world are there similar environments, similar climates, similar soils to Northern Australia, and the colours there represent degrees to which you get a good match, and you can see Africa has got a lot of colour as well alongside Northern Australia. So. Australia, Africa got a long history. I've found over the last 30 years that scientists from Australia and Africa have some real common interests. They generally get on really well and generally recognise they have a lot to learn from each other working on these shared challenges. This photo was taken recently at the Katumani National Dryland Farming Research Station in Kenya. I've just re-met the Honourable John Mutotho, and we've just realised we were together in 1986 in Kenya, and so we've just clicked again. And John, I'm not sure, I can't see you, but if you're in the room, you will probably recognise some of those characters because they were certainly there with you in 1986. And so my experience over this time has been we've got so much to learn by working together, and those benefits, what we learn actually. What we bring back to Australia in our work here has been, in my experience, far greater than what we've ever left behind in Africa. But hopefully we both see those learnings. This slide reflects some of our current partners with partnerships with ACIAR and AusAid in different parts of Africa, with Becca in ILRI in the east, and also with CORAF, a sub-regional organisation in West Africa. I won't dwell on the details of those partnerships, but I'd just say they're very active, and we appreciate our African partners as well as our Australian partners' contributions. So I'll just wrap up on this slide, John. It's really reflecting that innovation can come from some unexpected places. And it's not just going to come from the scientists. In fact, I think we need to see science as perhaps a bit of a stimulus to the innovation, not a replacement for it. And And that, you know, sustainably building African institutions, scientific capabilities and leadership under the very clear and well-directed objectives of the CADAP framework is where it's at. And finally, if the innovation shown by these young African children is anything to go by, it's a pretty promising future for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. That's great for keeping way ahead of time. Now, Dr. Mulugetta Mekuria has actually kindly offered to give up half his speaking time.
No.
in order to be able to show a very short film, which will take up the other half of his speaking time. So,
John, that was the deal we had. Thank you. Almost good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizers, ACIAR, the International Food Security Center, for giving us the opportunity, for bringing us all together here. I just would like to go to the ground. We have talked the big projections, models, what we can do for the continent. My short presentation would try to get you some ground truthing. We have talked about sustainable intensification. We have talked about greening of the environment, greening of the African farmers. In a small attempt by the generous support from ACIAR and CIMMYT's execution of the project and the long range of partners, international, national, regional, as you can see the beautiful flags over there. How do you do this one? It's a project called SIMLESA. It's now a big flagship for both CIMMYT and I think ACIAR, and trying to see how sustainable intensification of the most important food crops, cropping system, food and legumes are doing. This follows, where's the red button? Okay, I don't think I have to dwell on the problem complex we have here. The productivity, lack of biomass, land degradation, climate variability, poor and thin markets were emphasized by the previous presentations, including the limited resources that small farmers had, which result in food insecurity. Sorry. I think the basic starting point is we can do something. The minimum we can do is we can build this gap, this yield gap. You can see the potential, particularly for maize, with what we can get by increasing productivity at smallholder sector. A response that the ACIAR and CIMMYT and its partners did was to come up with a project of SIMLESA, which has the ambitious goal of putting, in the context of CADAP, increasing maize and legume yields by 30% in 10 years, reducing yield variability. And at the same time, we're trying to enhance partnership, capacity building in member institutions. Where are we working? John calls it SIMLESA 10 now. When we started, it was 5. We have spillover countries of Uganda, Rwanda, South Sudan, Zambia, and Botswana included. So we have the yellow shaded countries where the core countries where the project is being implemented. And we have seen the results from the ground, how maize yields and legume yields we were able to increase substantially. We do not only look at the complex interactions of rain-fed, rain-soiled, tillage, reduced cover, plus input are the complex variables that we consider in understanding the system. It's not only the biophysical yields we are considering, we are going to see these sustainable intensification interventions take time. We have been told again and again, but this has helped us to analyze the financial benefits of conservation agriculture practices promoted in the first 2 years of the project to increase incomes by, or returns by 40%, reduce costs by as far as high as 34%. Scaling out, I call it the weakest link in the R&D continuum. We are able to produce researches, but we haven't found out a menu how to scale out effectively. strengthening in country across the region. So we are trying to look at these issues in the future as scaling out and adoption pathways are the cornerstones of the new Food Security Center. Further research gaps, I think, have been emphasized by many of the previous speakers, including forage legumes, post-harvest technology, resilience, enhancing technologies, and so on. Take-home message we have is, for lunch probably, if not for home, is sustainable intensification through conservation agriculture practices in Africa is not only necessary, but urgent. We feel that we can face this intensification from the high to the low potential areas, and we have to focus on impact pathways, innovation platforms, and system integration. These are Professor Manza, happy farmers from my Malawi sites that have adopted the conservation agriculture practices, intercropping maize legumes, and so on. So let me, have I used my time, or I have 2 minutes to go, or go to the film?
We have a few minutes, that's 3 or 4 minutes to roll the film.
Okay, thank you very much. John, as a long-time farm systems research pioneer in farm systems research, and we have come up to call farm systems research as an old, good, maybe Australian wine, an old wine in new bottles. The new bottles are advanced research tools in plant sciences, in modeling. The other bottle is market linkage and value chain analysis. The other bottle is innovation platform for scaling out. And the important bottle is gender mainstreaming in our research and development. I think we are in that stage now to intensify sustainable intensification for Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mulugetta, again. For the extension. Could we roll? Here it comes.
Maize is the major cereal in Tanzania, and the major problem is drought. So this project is very, very important because we have developed maize technologies that are tolerant to drought. And this project is helping us to take these seeds to the farmers.
We have been able to take different materials from the breeding programs both in Kenya, Harare, and Ethiopia to release in our country for the farmers to use. This variety seems to be one which has a trait for giving 2 ears. So the farmers will choose the variety which the ears are not formed up here. Because when they are formed up here, they will be smaller and also they will cause lodging. They want it to be midway or a little bit down.
Conservation means that we are trying to conserve the little moisture we are getting in the soil so that can be utilized efficiently by the plant. When they harvest the crop, they leave the crop residue on top of the ground. And the little moisture we are getting is conserved through the mulch.
Nimeona ni nzuri zaidi, alafu inahifadhi maji, haimwagiki chini, inakaa kwenye mazao. Nimeona faida ya...
Faida ninayopata kutokana na kilimo hichi cha CA ni kwamba kazi inayofanyika hapa kazi ni ndogo, mapato yake ni makubwa. Ninapata chakula ya kutosha kwa familia na ziada ninauza kwa mahitaji kama kupeleka watoto shule na kulipa gharama zingine ndogo ndogo ambazo zinatumika pale nyumbani.
The good thing about intercropping in SIMLESA, you don't change the spacing between rows of the maize, and then you come and put your pigeon pea in between. pigeon pea. It also breaks down the soil so that you have more air for your maize plants to grow. And the leaves, they add more nitrogen in the soil.
After maturity of maize, when they harvest, actually the pigeon pea remain in the field and they come out later for a harvest.
Wakulima, tangu nimepanda hapa na nilikuwa ninawajibu kwamba hapa tumetumia teknolojia nyingine mpya ya kupiga dawa, alafu na kupalilia. Kazi ni ya kupalilia, hakuna ni kupangua tu.
Wanakuja kuangalia, lakini mara nyingine sisi hatuko nyumbani. Wao unapita unaangalia kilimo nzuri ndio hiyo. Hata wanasema kwamba kilimo nzuri ndio hiyo. Ndio hiyo.
Pande huu ni nzuri zaidi. Hata hii ni nzuri, lakini hii ni namba ya kwanza, number 1. It's very nice.
So thank you very much for bearing with us. We've now got a few minutes left for some questions to the presenters. And as we open the floor, I'd very much like you to mention, as you ask your question, your name and the name of your organisation, and please keep the question brief and to the point and directed towards one or other of the panel members. But I would like to open, though, by recognising a couple of questions already. First from Dr. Sadeke Abate. Dr. Sadeke.
John, thank you so much. My name is Sadeke Abate, as has been said. I work for CIMMYT. I am the leader of the drought-tolerant maize for Africa. My question was actually asked by my colleague here next to me earlier. The most important question for me: what is it that you are going to measure? What do you leave behind when we talk about the success of a project? How do we measure success? For me, as I have always said, it would be the enabling environment that has to be left behind for Africans. Until such time, we have Africans taking the leadership themselves, I don't think we can say we are successful in that. Just a couple of reminders. One, we have to be aware of the fact that issues are country specific. And two, I think we have to have clarity of concept. When projects come, projects are there to show the way. They are not there to replace what is going on in the country. So these has something to do, of course, with the countries taking the leadership and what is left behind. What do you measure? And I must finally say that there are examples of success. There are success stories in Africa, and we should build upon those. Why are those, some of those are successful, why others are not successful? I thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadeke. By total chance, we also have your neighbour again, who is Dr. Joanne Darley, who also, I think, has a question for one of the panellists.
Thanks very much, Joanne Daly from the ACIAR Commission. I was interested in understanding where the speakers saw the role of the private sector in actually growing productivity and food security in Africa. So you've talked a lot about, we hear a lot about what the public sector is doing, but where particularly is the best place for the private sector to intervene in the areas you're talking about?
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we pass back to the panellists? Please, Ambassador.
Thank you. You talked on education, you know, with the farmers. I can't remember where you had, in my notes, sorry. Leveraging for support for human resources, attracting and retaining youth and farmer education. One of the things I believe in, I think it's the background where I come from, is communication. We can have the best conferences, we can have the best policies, but if we are not able to communicate to reach the intended market, there is no point. And looking at new ways of communicating, especially to make it a way of life, because we're talking of issues of conservation and also some other issues. What is it that we are doing to communicate, to the lowest level, to those people who need this information more than us who sit at these conferences?
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Other questions? Please, very much, Professor.
Thank you. I've been trying to listen to the crop. There have been a lot of crops, promoted and different ways of treating them and so on. But I see a trend of actually less crops being promoted this time compared to the past. Less crops. And it looks to me that the past had more food security than we have now. But now we seem to be chasing fewer crops, and that's it. It looks like probably it's the commerce part of it. I think maybe we have commercialized agriculture too much. I don't know, but is this a problem? There are less crops now than there were in the past. Could somebody comment on this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mwang'ombe. Other questions at this stage? Let us... thank you.
Just a small one. The scalability of all these islands. My name is Adipala from Ruforum in Kampala. I just wanted the colleagues to comment on the scalability, like this last case that we have talked about. And then in terms of this food security center, what is the time duration? Because I think it takes time to achieve the outcome and impact that we're looking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Other quick questions?
Hello, I'm Ruth Buchman from Global Water Partnership Southern Africa, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. I guess it's an obvious point, but I need to ask all the presenters in the first panel, and maybe AIFC as well, just in terms of the emphasis and importance of food security, coming obviously from a sector that's trying to integrate with other sectors. Where is the interaction going to be in trying to link with water security issues? So I know from working in Southern Africa on the complexities of just water management and trying to engage and link with national development issues. And in, of course, Southern Africa, you've got the international river basins, and any promotion of agriculture and trying to address food security issues, you're going to have to touch on the national security, food security issues, national water security issues in the basin context, which is starting to get regional. So I'm just trying to think of the link, because we depend obviously on the water and the water technologies and the management and the politics and economies of water as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If, Jean-Marc.
Thank you, John. Jean-Jacques from Rwanda again. So, Prof. Agnes touched again this question about economic growth versus poverty reduction. So in terms of, this was discussed again by Professor Monti this morning about economic growth translated into poverty reduction. I'm wondering whether we're looking on the policy strategy gaps level, if most of our policies and strategies are not more economic growth oriented rather than poor kind of strategies. Are we engaging, promoting participation of the poor rural farmers in our policies so that the growth can be translated into poverty reduction? I think this is really a serious issue that probably will be discussed also in the next panel sessions. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let us give an opportunity back to the panel members to respond and elaborate quite briefly and quickly, as food security and lunch is waiting. But let's turn first of all to Agnes, to Professor Mwang'ombe, with two questions. The last one, plus also from the ambassador from Zimbabwe. Agnes, if you would like to open up.
Thank you. I start off with the one of Ambassador with respect to capacity building. I think it's a challenge to all of us as researchers as far as our outputs or technologies are concerned. Who are our targets? Many times we do the job and we think we are through. We've published, and that's how we keep taking in Africa, that we have a lot of technologies on the shelf and they are not reaching out to the farmers. And there are programs which have made a difference. Maybe I start off with the regional one. There was a program, and I was not participating in it, but through other work where I've also been involved with farmers at grassroots level, we found it truly at work. This was a program under FARA, SCADA, where they had inbuilt a very clear capacity building component, not just for long-term training, but also for the lower level beneficiaries, the farmers, up to actually processing. And we went into another program, and it's like we're building on whatever initiative was already ongoing. There are other methodologies which are being used, and in the morning I think I saw someone highlighting participatory rural approach. As we learn from the farmers at that level, we are also learning, and also they are learning from us. It's a very engaging process, but a number of times researchers shy away from it, from there, because you can now able to build some very good partnerships, not only with the farmers, but extension staff on the ground, where you also give them capacity as a long-term process when researchers disengage and go back to their labs or fields. So yeah, there are those partnerships. And when I talked about partnerships, I did not mean just researchers. How can we engage even the extension agents, whether public or private, at that level? For the youth, I think we need to give them opportunities to understand how is the market outside there when these students join us to start taking up BSc programs and so on. Can we also engage with them with professional mentorship to guide them in these processes? Because many times they drop by in the education pipeline as we talk about it.
Professor,
the last one maybe I would like to comment is the one given by Jean with respect to economic growth. I think one of the things we observe that is happening in Africa is that we are talking of, or rather we are observing economic growth, but we need to find out what sector is involved, where is our population. We are talking of 75 to 80% of the population being rural-based, but the sectors which are developing, are they agriculture-related? And that is the disconnect we are having in between. That the other sectors might be moving, whether you're looking at energy, industrialization or whatever, mining, where are the players of the rural communities in this? So that's something which our countries have to deal with in there.
Thank you very much, Professor. That's very well done. That brings us back perhaps to the first question, which is how do we measure success? What's it look like? I'd like to talk to Jimmy, if you'd like to address that, and particularly how do we measure it? What does it look like?
How do we measure it? Well, the before and after, I suppose. A challenging question to address in a very uniform way. But my understanding where the crux of your question was what do we leave behind? And of course, every project starts off with some specific objectives, but very often what we leave behind that is most important is probably the co-benefits of the project. The co-benefits, which of course deals with have we left more capacity behind? Have we left our partners or with whom we've engaged with more able to execute? Have we, in designing the project and implementing it, followed the Paris Declaration where countries are in the driver's seat, they own the development process? Is there really ownership? Is this addressing a real critical need, for example? So these would be the indicators I would use to think about, have I been successful or not? And the critical question of subsidiarity, why do you do something if the development partner should be doing it? Are we bringing added value to it?
Thank you very much. Could we just briefly step forward to the question from Ruth from the Global Water Partnership, if we can, Brian, about the role of water, because we haven't said much about water in a dry continent.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. I mean, water security is around water for human settlements, water for agriculture, and water for the environment. And you don't have to be in this country very long before you realise they're very hot topics at the moment, and not very far west of here. In an African context, I think it's clearly the efficiency with which water is used for agriculture is critical. Some of it's used for irrigation, of course, but most of the African water is used where it falls on the ground. So the efficiency of water use in a dryland situation is critical to everything we've been talking about, and it's critical, John, to Australian dryland farming as well. So we perhaps haven't been focusing on water security per se, but it's implicit in everything we're talking about, I think.
But do we need more water, or we just need to use the water better?
Well, unless you've got contacts with somebody, I don't have. Getting more water out of the sky is not something we have a lot of control over. We definitely need to use the water we've got more efficiently, yes.
What about all that groundwater in Africa we've heard about now?
Well, yeah, the question is it there to use sustainably, or is it just going to be there for a few years and then run out because it's not a sustainable, renewable resource? They're all questions very, very worthy of investigations.
Yeah, it's interesting. That might lead us back to this Professor Maize's question, Agnes, about fewer crops. We now observe fewer crops and less food security. Is there a connection?
Yeah, I think this is a point, and those of us who are coming from the continent where diversity of food crops was there. And these are the crops which very little attention is being paid to with respect to research and even promotion. The commercial seed systems do not support that, and I think the challenge is still to us. I talked about indigenous vegetables. You can hardly get them on the market, yet they are very key, very well priced, and so on. So at the national level, and I'm glad a number of you are coming from the NAS systems in here, we still have a role to maintain that. We get very many times we are, our research is fairly donor-driven. Maize gets the high priority, then now we talk of rice, we talk of these other legumes, and the rest fizzle out. So we have a responsibility at the national level to preserve that diversity, also for the food basket for the indigenous people. And I think if we are not careful, we are losing out on the vegetables, we are losing out on the legumes, and even the cereals. So we have a responsibility, Honorable Minister, to do some proper budget allocations to these crops, which at times we are describing them as orphaned crops. Thank you.
Of course, that links in some ways to the role of the private sector, which was the question from Joanne. That's kind of quite a challenge for all of us. We've been talking about private sector engagement for a long, long time. Perhaps, Mulugetta, would you like to reflect on the SIMLESA experience on the ground with linking up to private sector, very briefly, and then how that relates to Professor Adipala's question about scalability.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a very important question. Last March, we were privileged by the presence of the Commission in our second annual meeting of SIMLESA partners. We built what we call SIMLESA Village, where we're able to bring private sector partners working with us to demonstrate what they are doing, how they are doing it. The colorful dressed lady that was explaining about the varieties is a manager and owner of a seed company in Tanzania, a former researcher. We have created a platform, innovation platform, where agro-dealers, private seed companies, fertilizer traders are brought in to the forum where we discuss issues regarding how we can scale out, how we can bring the private sector, how inputs can be brought into the communities. So this, in a small way, we have included the private sector to be a partner in our R&D in SIMLESA. On scalability, Prof, we have put a pathway as to how we can reach from small communities, research communities, regions, and countries. We have defined a pathway for that. We have agreed on how we can go from few farmers to 650,000 households during the project life. This project, we are not reaching millions or hundreds of households within a year or 2 or 5 years. It takes time. So we have had that experience now on scaling out practices that have been proven in the last 2 years, already started. So it is an important area of scaling out. Is not a science, I think. It's more of an art. It needs chemistry. It needs passion between partners to work together and believe in what they are doing. I think we can do a lot if we have this missionary zeal of how do you reach the small farmers, how do you live capacity at the ground, at the grassroots level, and believe in the farmers, believe in our scientists, believe in the private sector that's emerging, not crowding it out by some unfriendly government regulations and policies that we see in some of the countries I am working. Thank you.
That's a very inspiring and motivational note from Mulugetta to finish on, of dedication, commitment, and inspiration. So we've had a very rich set of ideas from the speakers and from the floor. Let me, without in any sense endeavouring to summarise, simply draw attention to 4 things that struck me. And number 1, first and foremost, was we're very clear that sub-Saharan Africa has the potential to feed itself and actually to feed substantial parts of the world by 2050. The potential is there. Number 2, we frequently overlook the role of livestock. And yet livestock have been so important in poverty reduction in many locations. 7 of the 9 highest value commodities were livestock commodities. And 90% is consumed in country and not being exported. So this must be one element related to food security that we sometimes overlook. Number 3, the whole question of scaling out and spillovers, which lies at the heart of the Food Security Centre operations. How do we take research results through to the farmer, and how do we do that with different channels in different locations, engaging private sector, as Mulugetta was talking about, but also public sector and NGOs. Number 4, the question about seed systems. Post-harvest, I think, was a very important point to bring onto the table from Agnes. So those are just 4 highlights to take away. I'd like to suggest we give a big round of applause to the 4 members.